Hello, and welcome back to Shade Tree Philosophy. I'm Dave, and we're going to continue today with our study of the Gospel of Mark, uh, King James Version. We're in the chapter 11 right now, about the middle of the chapter. And we've come all the way through now where Jesus is in Jerusalem. And if you've missed the prior chapters, well, go back and to the channel, and you can find those videos. We go through the whole gospel. This is a line study, so we stick to the narrative, and that's what we're trying to do each time. And so I'm going to pick us up today on verse 13 in the 11th chapter. And Jesus is coming into the city, and seeing a fig tree afar off having leaves, he came, and haply he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of the figs was not yet. And Jesus answered and saith unto it, No man eat fruit of thee there hereafter forever. And his disciples heard it. So it's kind of just this moment, as they're walking in. And they come to Jerusalem, and they went into the temple, and they began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves. So, when we last left, in the last video, Jesus had come into the city, right? And so people are calling out to him, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Now, that word Hosanna, translated, means, save us, we pray. And this is a very tense time in Jerusalem. This is a time when they are dominated by a suppressive, conquering force. The Romans came in and conquered the Jews. And so the Passover celebration is all about the Jews being released from bondage under the Israelites. So there's a lot of zealots and a lot of desire of patriotism for their country, and for being a free people, not being not a persecuted people, which they were persecuted, but a suppressed people, people dominated by the Roman peace, which means do what we say or die. And so they were still allowed their customs, which the Romans did. They allowed people to have their customs and their beliefs, but you had to deal with the Romans, and the Romans, what they said is what went on. And so this is a different time, in the Jewish history, and how they interacted with the temple because of who the high priests were at this time and how they became high priests. They were kind of, what do you say, a vassal of Rome in some sense. I don't know if vassal is the right word, but they had a lot of influence on the Sadducees, who were a ruling class people who were also in charge of the temple. And so those people were somehow connected in with Herod, I believe, and anyway, there was influence there. There was influence from the Greek side of things, and somehow they were tied in there, but that's a whole nother can of worms. So anyway, so Jesus comes into a time that's very, very wrought with zealots and pilgrims and people that are celebrating the Passover, which is, of course, what we already talked about. So Jesus comes into the temple, and he began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple. Now, there's a couple of things going on here, because he says money changers and the seats of those that sold doves. Now, the money changers is a very interesting thing here, because the priests and those who controlled the temple would usually only accept Jewish money at one time. And so the money changers were there for pilgrims from other countries to be able to change their money out into an acceptable form of paying the temple tax. And the temple tax was paid once a year, and so they didn't have to necessarily pay it at Passover, but they would. And so it was critical to have the money changers there then. But by the time Jesus's time, the people that ran the temple only wanted what was called a Tyrian shekel, which was the same size as the half shekel, which is what the Jews had to pay as their temple tax once a year was a half shekel. But there was a Tyrian shekel that the that the high priests and those that ran the temple liked, because it was a high grade of silver and they wanted Tyrian shekels. But it was a Greek coin though, and that was the whole reason for having money changers in the first place, was not to have Greek money or not to have foreign money, but to have Jewish money. But by this time, they just wanted the highest grade silver, and so they went for the Tyrian shekel, which actually bore the face of something to do with Hercules, I guess Hercules. But anyway, it was the god of Tyre. Tyre was the town where the Tyrian shekel was minted, which was a Phoenician town at one point, and then it became Hellenized and became part of the Romans network of towns, and it was right on the coast, and that's why it was very important. It was a it was a town that was a port that was built by Herod the Great, actually. But anyway, so I think that's Tyre. I could be wrong there, but anyway. It was still a very important city. So they minted these silver coins. And actually, as a matter of fact, these are the coins that they believe that were used, the coins given to Judas when he betrayed Jesus, the 30 silver coins, because they came from the temple. And then when it was blood money, they couldn't put it back in the treasury. So they had to do something, but it was Tyrian shekels that he was paid with. So anyway, he throws these guys out, and what they've been doing is they've been charging whatever they want for these exchanging of money. So it's really just a business, and there's also these people that sold doves, and these were people that were there that were to provide people who had sacrifices, and doves were usually for the poor. So I guess the reason why it brings up just the particular doves in this version is because it's referring maybe to the poor and those that could afford doves. But anyway, again, they were charging these people inflated prices and skimming it off the top. And I believe it was run by the temple. So they were getting their temple tax and then getting back, kickbacks from these money changers, I suppose, or whatever the deal was with that. But Jesus comes in and he runs them all out. It says he overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of those that sold doves. Now, it doesn't say here that this where this was located, and so I'm not going to go into too much other than to say it was in the Gentile court, which was there meant particularly for Gentiles to pray, because that's the closest they could get, and it was one of the outer courts, and that's where of course, the Jewish rulers and those that ran the temple allowed that sort of thing to go, because of course they didn't want it in their area, I'm sure. So it was a lot of things going on there. There was people taking and taking from those who were coming in to pay their tax anyway, and they were adding their additional tax, which is something actually that the tax collectors did for the Romans too. This is how they did it. They gave the Romans what they wanted, and they kept whatever they could get off the top for themselves. And this is kind of the same thing that's going on right in the temple. And a Jew would not have anything to do with a Jewish tax collector who collected for the Romans. Anyway, he runs them out. And so Jesus isn't making any brownie points. He's letting himself be known. And that, some believe that this particular act eventually is what led to his death, among other things. So in verse 16, and would not suffer that any man should carry any vessel through the temple. Now that's an interesting point, because now he's stopping all commerce, I guess. He's like, no. This is not about making money here. This is about something he's going to go on and say. And he taught, saying unto them, it is written, my house shall be called of all nations the house of prayer, but you have made it into a den of thieves. So these are a bunch of guys, Jesus knows what's going on. And that goes right up to the top, because if this is a den of thieves, well, who's the leader of the thieves? Who's allowing this sort of thing to go on? It's the high priest, actually. And the scribes and the chief priests heard it and sought how they might destroy him. Right, is what I was saying earlier. For they feared him. Now, whether they feared him because they were afraid that he was a righteous man, I don't think that's what it was. I think they feared him because they thought that he was going to stop their way of making money and staying wealthy through those temple taxes and through the money changers and selling of these sacrifices. Another interesting thing about these sacrifices is that I was reading something today on that, and they said that a lot of these guys that were in charge of selling the doves were also in charge of inspecting other sacrifices, because there was more than just the selling of doves going on. But it just mentions the selling of doves here. But these guys were also in charge of the inspecting the sacrifices oftentimes, so they could say, well, that wasn't acceptable. You have to buy one of ours, and this is what it's going to cost you. But anyway, that's just something I read today. And the scribes and the chief priests heard it and sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all the people was astonished at his doctrine. So they feared him because the people were astonished. That was one thing. And they knew that ultimately the people have control, just like today, right? Isn't it the people that really have control? You wouldn't think that sometimes. But, in this case, these are religious people that are looking for a teacher and a savior. And so they had reason to fear, because maybe Jesus could win the hearts and minds of these people, and Jesus would try to take over the temple. Who knows what was running through the chief priests and the scribes' heads, because, they've already dealt with him times before. Remember the scribes and it's just the Pharisees, I think, not the Sadducees, would go to Jesus from Jerusalem where he was at and ask him questions. And so now he's arrived in Jerusalem, and so he's dealing with these same folks, and now he's dealing with actually the temple leadership, which are the Sadducees, which is another class. Like I said, they're a ruling class of people, so they were the royalty, but they were also had connection to Herod the Great, and so they were kind of a Hellenized group who were the chief priests of the temple. And so they had made it into a business. So that den of thieves went right up to the chief priests. All right. Verse 19, and when even was come, he went out of the city. And in the morning they passed by, and they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, calling to remembrance, saith unto him, Master, behold, the fig tree that thou cursest is withered away. Now, isn't it interesting that just in a few verses, of all the times that Jesus is doing things around Jerusalem that we're reading about, he's not doing acts of violence. He's not doing acts of cursing. But, here it is. We get both in just a few verses. It's always just been peculiar to me that that's in here. So chew on that one. So Peter says, okay, well, this tree died. You cursed the tree and it died. And he's gobsmacked. And Jesus answering saith unto them, have faith in God. Okay. But Jesus is all about having faith in God, so that's not an unusual answer from him, but I wonder, that seems kind of milquetoast. I don't know. So then he goes on. For verily I say unto you, that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatever he saith. Now that's another big promise of Jesus. But that's, what he's getting at. He's not saying he doesn't have faith in God. That's kind of the thing you hear at church when you're going through a lot of suffering, and people say, "Oh, well, you just need to have faith." I don't know if that's what I would want to have heard from Jesus at that time, but anyway, that's what he said. And then he goes on and he brings out the big guns. And so he's saying, "Look, I cursed this tree and it died." Yeah. But if you have faith in God, and whatever you say can happen. You can even say to a mountain. Now, I have never seen anybody move a mountain, so I don't think this is a literal teaching. I have never seen anybody move a mountain, or they haven't been able to live up to the faith that Jesus is talking about here, right? But is that what Jesus is talking about? I think he's saying, look, the things that seem so insurmountable in your life that you don't think that you'll be able to overcome, those things, if you do not doubt and you believe in your heart that God is able to get you through them, he's able to. And maybe it's something that's completely out of your control. Maybe you're dealing with your Goliath, in your life that's going to be your big challenge. That might be a mountain to you. I had a problem with a bank one time. That was a very big issue. It had to do with my property. And I was in the right, but they were trying to foreclose on me. And so in the end, the victory was sure. But it was a fight, and it was a real time to be tested for me. When you have something that you love and you're afraid that someone's going to, by hook and crook, and that's what it was, try to take my home from me. All I can say in all that is that God's power was made clear. But I had to walk in faith because it took a long time to settle that problem, but it got settled. And that was a mountain for me. For other people, it could be, illness. It could be a lot of things, I hope to never have to deal with illness because I don't know if I could deal with that mountain. But anyway, God forbid. In our prayer to our fathers, we call it the Our Father. It says in the, do not lead us into temptation. Another way of thinking about that is, don't put us to the test. And so I often pray that I am not put to the test because I prayed that I would fail. So anyway, verse 24. Therefore, I say unto you, what things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. So, that's another big promise. And so those are just, they're convicting, but they are promises to be claimed. They're not ones to be ignored. And they're great sources of hope for those who are being tested. Verse 25. And when ye stand praying, forgive if ye have aught against any, that your Father also, which is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses. I'm going to read that again. And when ye stand praying, forgive if ye have aught against any, that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses. Isn't that the golden rule? just said it another way. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father which is in heaven forgive your trespasses. It's easier to forgive. It's easier to forgive than to bear the weight of having something held against your neighbor. It's just easier on you. It makes you a better person. Well, we went through 20 minutes fast on this video, seems like. We didn't make it very far. We're going to come back, I'm sure, to some of that. But anyway, we're stopping on verse 24 today and continue to study. And with your studies at home, like I said before, if you haven't looked at the prior videos, please go back and look at them. I think you'll find them worth your time. And we'll see you again at the next video. Take care.